Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are getting into something pretty intense.
Yeah, intense is definitely an understatement for this one.
Right. And before we jump in and really unpack the history of our institutions, before they were captured by feminists and Marxists, do us a huge favor. If you want us to keep bringing you these, unfiltered breakdowns, you need to like and subscribe.
Absolutely. The algorithm doesn't exactly favor this kind of content.
It really doesn't. So like, subscribe, and help us keep this deep dive going. Today, we are looking at a text that positions itself basically as a weapon.
A counter-weapon, really.
Exactly. We are reviewing the ebook Fempire, Face Stamp Eternal, a welfare cuckocracy built on the bones of men who pay for and defend it while enforcing rights for the ungrateful, by Conrad Riker.
That title alone, it tells you exactly what you're in for.
It's a barricade. Now, a quick disclaimer for you listening. This book dives deep into some highly politically charged content. Left-wing, right-wing, it touches all the third rails.
Oh yeah, all of them.
So we want to make it incredibly clear. We are not taking sides here. We are not endorsing the viewpoints in this material. Our mission is strictly to impartially report on the author's arguments. We are just the messengers trying to convey the ideas as they are presented in the source.
Right. We're laying out the blueprint Riker constructed so you can understand the architecture of his argument. And his argument is that Western civilization has been captured by a specific ideology, what he calls the Fempire.
And he claims this apparatus has turned the institutions against the very men who built them. Now, we are going to cover as much ground as we can today, but if you want the full arsenal, the charts, the historical data, you need to buy this ebook right now.
Yeah, you really need the primary source to grasp the sheer volume of data he's compiled.
It is available right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. Go check it out.
Yeah.
And you should also follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack for his ongoing analysis.
So let's get into the engine room here. The foundation of Riker's argument rests on this concept of the welfare cacocracy.
Right, which is a pretty obscure term. We all know democracy, aristocracy. What exactly is a cacocracy?
So it derives from the Greek word kakos, meaning bad. It literally translates to rule by the worst.
Rule by the worst.
Yes. Riker argues that in a classical aristocracy, or a meritocracy, the people who take risks and produce value rise to the top. But he claims we've inverted that. We now live in a system where the incompetent rule through the weaponization of victimhood.
The hierarchy is just completely flipped upside down.
Exactly. In his view, the builder is now demonized, labeled as toxic, while the dependent consumer is sanctified by the state.
Which leads into one of the most abrasive concepts in the book. He calls it the soft cuckolding of the bachelor.
Yeah, it's a jarring phrase.
Very jarring. But he's making a hard economic argument here, isn't he? It's not just a provocation.
No, it's an economic claim wrapped in sexual imagery. He argues that the state has effectively replaced the husband and the father.
By using taxes.
Right. He breaks down the math, claiming that single men are statistically the primary net tax producers. They put way more into the system than they take out. On the flip side, he argues single mothers and the welfare apparatus are net tax consumers.
So when a guy looks at his pay stub and sees a third of his income gone, Riker is saying that isn't just paying for roads and bridges.
He calls it a wealth transfer mechanism. He asserts that men are forced, under threat of prison, which is what tax evasion gets you, to subsidize a reproductive strategy that completely excludes them.
He actually calls the taxman a state-sanctioned mugger at one point.
He does. And he ties this directly to the nature of money itself. This is his fiat feminism thesis, which is arguably the most complex economic point in the book.
I found this fascinating. Explain the fiat feminism concept, because it bridges macroeconomics and gender dynamics in a way you don't usually see.
So Riker argues that back when currency was pegged to gold, reality wasn't actual constraint. Production had to precede consumption. You couldn't spend money that didn't exist.
Because you literally had to dig the gold out of the ground?
Exactly. And in Riker's framework, that kind of hard production is historically coded as masculine. But then we decoupled from gold in the 1970s.
The printing press goes brrr.
Right. Fiat currency money by government decree allowed the state to print purchasing power out of thin air. Riker argues this severed the link between production and consumption. It allowed the state to fund this massive gynocentric welfare apparatus without needing corresponding male productivity to back it up.
Wow. So inflation isn't just a byproduct of bad policy. In this framework, inflation is a tool of social engineering.
That's his claim. It devalues the saver, the man trying to build capital to fund the immediate gratification of the state and its dependents.
Okay, so if that's the economic fuel, the culture has to provide the justification for it, right? Because you can't just extract resources without a moral narrative.
That brings us to what he calls institutional capture. He traces this back to the Frankfurt School and cultural Marxism.
Right, so let's unpack that history. Because he argues the focus had to shift for this capture to work.
The argument is that classical Marxism failed in the West because the working class was too comfortable. They didn't want a revolution, they wanted a mortgage and a car. So the revolutionaries needed a new proletariat.
They pivoted from a class struggle to an identity struggle.
Exactly. The conflict was rebranded into oppressed identity versus oppressor. And Riker argues that men, specifically white, heterosexual men, were slotted into the role of the bourgeoisie. They became the universal oppressor.
And this requires the weaponization of language. He brings up terms like mansplaining and toxic masculinity.
He calls those terms unassailable weapons because they function to bypass logic completely. If I present objective data and you label it mansplaining, you don't have to refute my data.
You just invalidate me as the speaker.
Right. It attacks the source based on identity, not the argument itself.
Which sets up probably the most controversial analogy in the entire ebook, the term Menkampf.
Yeah, he draws a direct parallel to historical propaganda from the 1930s.
And again, we are just reporting his framework here. What is he trying to illustrate with that comparison?
He's highlighting the mechanics of dehumanization. Riker argues that before a society can loot a specific group, seize their assets, deny them custody in family court, tax them disproportionately, you have to dehumanize them. You have to convince the public that this group is the root of all societal evil.
Create a strict oppressor versus oppressed binary.
Exactly. And in that binary, the oppressor has no moral standing. Anything done to the oppressor is framed as justice.
That's why he says the media and universities push this narrative so hard. It provides the moral cover for the economic extraction. Speaking of universities, he goes hard on the academic system. He calls them indoctrination centers.
He describes it as a taxonomical deconstruction of the university. He argues that we've seen a shift from logos, reason, logic, objective truth to pathos, which is emotion and feeling.
And he specifically targets standpoint epistemology.
Yes, which is the idea that your knowledge is dictated by your social position. It claims that an oppressed person has special access to truth that a dominant person inherently cannot understand.
So lived experience automatically trumps objective data.
In that framework, yes. Riker calls this a literal war on logic. If there is no shared standard of objective truth, debate is impossible. The spreadsheet is thrown out as a tool of the patriarchy.
And if a professor tries to stand their ground on objective truth,
They get purged. He cites academics like Mike Adams and Brett Weinstein, who are essentially mobbed out of their positions for relying on logos instead of pathos.
and this ideology doesn't stay on campus, it bleeds into the media machine. He talks about the advertising inversion. Every guy listening knows exactly what he means by the bumbling dad trope in commercials.
Oh, definitely. Riker argues it's not just lazy writing. It's a humiliation ritual designed to condition society to view the father as a defective child who needs a woman to manage him, rather than as a protector or authority.
He also mentions the Netflix algorithm of demoralization, bringing up the Batgirl movie cancellation as proof.
It's a great example. Warner Brothers spent $90 million on a movie and then shelved it entirely. Riker interprets this as the Fempire burning capital to sustain the narrative.
Burning the furniture to heat the house.
Right. He argues that DEI mandates have ruined storytelling because you aren't allowed to depict a competent male hero unless he is being lectured or upstaged. They'd rather lose $90 million than lose control of the messaging.
Okay, we need to pivot to the physical arguments he makes. The economic and cultural points are one thing, but the chapter on the war on biology is deeply unsettling.
The medical matrix. This is where he shifts into endocrinology. He brings up the massive generational decline in male testosterone levels since the 1970s.
And he firmly believes this is not an accident.
He points to environmental factors, plastics, xenoestrogens in the water, chemicals like atrazine. He actually cites Dr. Tyrone Hayes' research where atrazine exposure chemically castrated frogs.
He calls the result of this the gelded drone theory.
Yes. The idea is that a high testosterone male population is assertive and difficult to control, but a low testosterone population is passive and compliant. Riker argues the system prefers the gelded drones.
He also looks at the money in healthcare, calling it a medical welfare aristocracy.
The spending disparity is massive. Women consume significantly more healthcare resources per capita, yet men pay the majority of the taxes funding it.
He also points out the inversion of the gender pain gap.
The mainstream narrative is that women's pain is ignored. Rucker argues the data shows the exact opposite, that men's pain is routinely dismissed as a character flaw.
Just walk it off.
Right. Or men are overprescribed painkillers to keep them numb, which he links directly to the opioid crisis, a crisis that overwhelmingly kills men, but receives a fraction of the funding and empathy compared to other health issues.
It all feeds into what he calls the democracy of loot, and the legal labyrinth is built to protect that loot. Let's talk about VLWA, the Violence Against Women Act.
Riker views VLWA as codifying a two-tiered justice system. It funnels billions into resources specifically for female victims. But he cites CDC data showing men are victims of domestic violence at comparable rates. Yet there is virtually zero federal funding for male shelters.
Because under the oppressed binary, violence is only recognized if it happens to the designated victim class.
Exactly. And he ties this lack of accountability directly to voting rights, bringing in the concept of skin in the game.
This is definitely one of his more radical solutions.
He argues that universal suffrage without universal contribution is a suicide pact. If you can vote to confiscate treasury funds that you didn't contribute to, you will eventually bankrupt the society.
So he wants voting tied to net tax contribution or military service.
Yes. If you aren't helping to row the ship, you shouldn't get a say in where it steers.
Okay, so the picture he paints is incredibly bleak. A system taxing you to fund your replacement, a culture demonizing you, universities rejecting logic, and an environment chemically altering you. So what does the author say men should actually do about this?
His solution is exodus and reconstruction. He says, do not try to save the system, starve it.
Men going galt.
A direct nod to Ayn Rand. If the concocracy runs on male labor and taxes, the rebellion is withholding that fuel. Become a sovereign individual.
Practically, how does he suggest doing that? He talks about parallel institutions.
Financially, he advocates moving to Bitcoin and crypto to escape the feminized fiat banking system that can inflate your savings or debank you.
And for education, you obviously aren't sending your kids to the indoctrination centers.
He proposes building red pill universities, returning to the classical trivium grammar, logic, and rhetoric, teaching men how to think to build cognitive immunity against propaganda with stoicism as the operating system.
And social isolation is a real risk when you walk away like that. So he reframes the manosphere.
He calls these online networks digital monasteries. Just like monasteries preserve knowledge during the Dark Ages, he argues these digital spaces are preserving logic and masculine virtue until society is sane enough to value them again.
There is also a spiritual reconstruction he calls for, right?
Yes. He says men must reject the Church of the Sacred Vagina, his term for the worship of female victimhood. He calls for a return to a god of justice and logos.
A total rebuild. Economics, mind, and spirit.
Building a new Jerusalem. Don't fight the rigged game. Build a parallel meritocratic society and let the old system collapse under its own incompetence.
The ultimate call to action is for men to become nodes of masculine consciousness, to stop apologizing and start building.
Exactly.
Listen, we have covered a lot of ground today, but we've really only scratched the surface of the arguments Riker lays out. There is so much more data in the source material.
You have to read the book to see how deep this goes.
You really do. So if you want the full blueprint, head over to Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks right now and buy Fempire Face Stamp Eternal. Support the author, but more importantly, get this information for yourself.
And remember to follow @ConradWriter on Substack so you don't miss his ongoing analysis.
Absolutely. And if you got value out of this deep dive, like and subscribe. Share this with a friend, a brother, or a son who needs to hear this. Share it with someone who needs to be red-pilled on the reality of the institutions around them.
Riker ends the book by quoting historians Spengler and Toynbee. Civilizations either transform or they die.
Conformity or the honor of resistance. He leaves that choice to you. But I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, something outside the book but building on it. If these digital monasteries successfully preserve logic and build a parallel New Jerusalem, what happens to the boys who are left behind in the collapsing system?
That's a dark thought.
The ones who never find the exit, will they just fade away, or will they become the most unpredictable, radicalized wild cards when the catocracy finally runs out of other people's money? Think about that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Stay sovereign.